OK, well, we've just heard there from the politicians, but now it is your turn. We're live and we're ready to hear from you on Raw Politics, Your Call. Well, another busy day, isn't it, with Brexit. We heard from Donald Tusk in the last couple of hours saying that the EU will only agree to a short delay to Brexit if MPs approve Theresa May's deal next week, and that is far from certain. But where does it leave democracy? Is democracy in the UK dead? That is certainly the claim of Donald Trump Jr.'s son, who said that essentially the will of the people has been ignored because of elite politicians in Brussels. Is he right? What do you think?
And the second question we're putting to you tonight is Brussels versus Orban. Which side are you on? He's flouted the rule of law in Hungary. He's spread misinformation about migration, and he's actually smeared the European Commission president in a poster campaign. And just today, in the last couple of minutes, in fact, the European Parliament's biggest party, that's the European People's Party, a centre-right party, has decided to expel his political group, Fidesz. Suspend, in fact, and not expel. There was contemplation of expelling, but I understand it's
they've gone for a suspension.
So they've decided to suspend him from the ranks. So we want to know what you think, because many people say that he actually represents his voters. So get in touch.
Do you want to see free trade with the United States? It's been an ongoing rocky road between the US and the EU. In many regards, things have got worse in the last couple of months, clearly with the Trump presidency. But after potentially the start of negotiations again, would you be happy to see free trade with the US? Would you be happy to see more American goods sold here on the continent? Again, let us know what you think. You know what to do. The lines are open. Pick up the phone. The telephone is free. It is 00800 333 3700 2. We are ready to take your calls downstairs in the basement of the European Parliament, sitting by. You can email us rawpoll@euronews.com. Or, if you prefer to use social media, use the hashtag #RawPolitics on Twitter or on Facebook.
Absolutely. We're also live streaming on Facebook, so hello to all our viewers there. And joining us here in the studio tonight to answer some of your questions and your queries, we're delighted to say hello to Marietje Schaak. She's a Dutch MEP from the Alliance of Liberals and Democrats, and a regular face as well on Raw Politics. And Jonathan Bullock, you're welcome. It's a British MEP from the Brexit Party, sitting with the Europe for Freedom and Democracy here in the European Parliament.
Great. We're going to look forward to, hopefully, a live discussion over the next 45 minutes or so. But first, let's go to Lyon and to Euronews headquarters and to Isabel, who's standing by with the very latest news this hour. Isabel.
Good evening, Darren and Maeve. Well, these are our top stories. British Prime Minister Theresa May has officially requested a 3-month Brexit extension from the EU. She's hoping to buy enough time to get her twice rejected withdrawal deal through Parliament. The request has deepened divisions in the House of Commons. MPs launched into an emergency debate on the extension request this afternoon. European Council President Donald Tusk says the EU will approve the short-term delay, but only if Mrs May's withdrawal deal is approved next week. Former Bosnian Serb leader Radovan Karadzic will spend the rest of his life behind bars after losing his appeal at a UN court in The Hague. Karadzic had asked the court to overturn a 40-year sentence for genocide, war crimes and crimes against humanity related to the 1995 Srebrenica genocide during the Bosnian War. Today, the judge said the original sentence was too light and extended it to life. And the pan-European centre-right European People's Party has voted to suspend Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban and his Fidesz party until further notice. The move comes after widespread calls for disciplinary action over alleged rule of law violations and an anti-EU campaign. Orban has signalled he'd resign rather than accept a suspension. Well, those are our top stories. Now back over to you in Brussels.
Isabel, thank you very much. Indeed, Joseph Daul in the last, few minutes or so has just tweeted saying that suspension will take place with immediate effect and until further notice. Following the vote, there was 190 in favour, 3 against. What it means, in essence, the decision made here actually in the Parliament, no attendance at party meetings, no voting rights, no right to propose candidates for posts. What it does mean, of course, is an expulsion from the party that some were calling for. And we'll be coming back to the issue of Orban and Brussels a little bit later. But first, democracy, is it dead in the UK? With the possibility that Brexit still might not happen. It's provoked a reaction from Donald Trump Jr. in the United States, a view undoubtedly, I think, shared by the US president, who's saying that the will of the people is likely to be ignored by elite politicians in Brussels.
And these two elite politicians might have something to say about that.
Well, my view entirely is that Donald Trump Jr. is right in that we are being ignored by politicians both in Westminster and in Europe. The British people voted by a majority to leave the EU nearly 3 years ago. That has to be implemented. We triggered Article 50. The House of Commons triggered Article 50. The manifesto of both parties at the general election said we will honour the result.
If Brexit is stopped, though, it won't be stopped by politicians here, or indeed anyone in the European Union. It'll be stopped by Westminster. And you're someone who campaigned on parliamentary sovereignty, on Westminster taking back control.
But you have to implement the result of the referendum first. The referendum, which is above the Parliament, because the referendum was of the whole of the British people, that decided to leave the EU. That needs to be implemented.
Well, Theresa May is certainly doing her best anyway to try and execute that. Marita, what are your thoughts on that?
I'm kind of mind-boggled when I hear that the people are ignoring Brexit. I mean, for what, 2.5 years now? We've been talking about it day in, day out. I hear about people in the United Kingdom that are sick and tired of it. They want to see where this is going. And your parliament, the directly elected representatives of the people, are fighting over what the best way out is. You know, they're debating about it. I really don't understand who in their right mind, especially Donald Trump Jr. from the other side of the Atlantic, seems to know that your parliament, your democracy is not functioning. You've yourself established a new political party. Why would you go through that if you think democracy in your country is in a near-death phase?
Well, let's get some callers.
I believe we have our first caller tonight. So Peter from Poole, thank you so much for calling us here tonight. And tell us, what do you think? Is democracy in the UK dead?
Democracy in the UK isn't dead. We've witnessed that through the discussion in Parliament, despite the fact that the Prime Minister tried to shortcut discussion by frustrating the Parliament and by repeatedly trying to put forward a deal which was rejected twice with quite a big majority. So I don't think that democracy is dead. I also don't think that democracy is the dictatorship of the proletariat, which some of the extreme Brexiters imply, that because we have a majority of 52%, we should immediately rush to Brexit. When the referendum took place, the population wasn't told what the different types of Brexit that could happen. The implications of the different types of Brexit were not given to the populace. Therefore, a decision was made probably for the wrong reason.
Well, Peter, people did vote to leave. I mean, irrespective of how to leave, they did vote to leave. They were promised they would be leaving next week, and that now looks like it's not happening. I mean, that's not great, considering that.
It's just as likely that we're going to have no-deal Brexit.
You think so? You think we're still going to go for no deal?
Well, even if it is by accident, we might actually leave the EU without a deal, which is going to be catastrophic for the majority of the people who actually voted for this.
And Peter, I don't know if you heard what Donald Tusk, the head of the European Council, had to say a little bit earlier. He was setting the scene ahead of tomorrow's European Council, and he clearly said that he'd received the letter from Theresa May and he would contemplate this extension, a short extension, but there was a condition, and that was that the meaningful vote would have to be passed. What do you think of that?
Well, he wants some kind of decision from the British Parliament, and at the moment there doesn't seem to be one, because there is no majority for any one solution, including Mrs. May's deal.
And who's to blame for that? Many people would say Brexiteers. As in, if you backed May's deal, actually, you could have left next week.
Exactly. Now, to put all this into
stay with us,
perspective,
Peter.
Yeah, we're just going to get what Jonathan has to say on that.
Yeah, but May's deal would have just put us in orbit around the EU. It'd still be a rule taker. It could hive off Northern Ireland from the United Kingdom eventually. It wasn't acceptable. And I'd just say this, that about a no deal, World Trade Organization rules would actually be good for the UK. We always hear this. When we didn't join the euro, we were told our economy had been a mess, we'd suffer for it. In fact, we prospered without being in the euro. Immediately after the referendum, they'd say there'd be job losses, the stock market would crash. Exactly the opposite happened. The stock market held up, and also jobs have improved since. And so everything, all these scare stories have not happened.
Peter, you were laughing during that. Has he not got a point?
Yes, basically, we have to really examine what Brexit is about. Brexit has been a Conservative Party problem for a long time. There was a small minority of extremists in the Conservative Party that never accepted the fact that we joined the European Union back in the 70s. And they have dogged a number of prime ministers over the years. I remember John Major calling them bastards, referring to that particular group of people. So what has happened is that this small minority managed to swindle the population into thinking that Brexit is a good thing. You might be able to fool the young, but I'm old enough to remember in the 70s when Britain was considered to be the sick man of Europe. Now, Britain's fortunes have got better and better while the UK was in Europe.
But how do you explain that someone like Dr. David Owen, a social democrat who actually left the Labour Party in the 1980s over the issue of Europe because he was pro-Europe, he voted and supported Brexit this time. So this isn't just a problem within the Conservative Party or just on the extremes. This was people like David Owen realising that EU has turned into a pernicious political organisation which has taken over control of many democracies.
But why is your
in
government
the EU.
then so keen on entering and getting involved when it comes to home and justice affairs? The UK are the most active member when it comes to Interpol and other areas, and they still want to be a very active member despite the fact that they voted to take back control. So regardless what's happened, you will still want to work and be cooperating.
Oh, we can work with the EU just like other countries work with the EU. There's nothing wrong with that at all. We're still in Europe. We'll still be friends. We can still trade.
But do you not understand that you cannot...
want our rules and our laws made by Europe, and the majority of the British people made this decision.
You do, and you're cheerleading for these exact very rules because they benefit you and they keep Britain safer when you can cooperate with other countries when it comes to catching terrorists, for example.
That's cooperation. It's not rule.
Peter, thank you very much for calling in. Other people getting in touch with us.
The whole WTO is about trade rules, by the way, but let's keep going.
Just Helmut saying people can also change their opinion, therefore the majority is now against the Brexit, as Helmut puts it. The problem with that is there doesn't seem to have been there seems to be a bit of a change, potentially, towards remaining inside, but not significant enough. For example, if there was another referendum in Britain tomorrow, it's possible you might get the same result, or Remain might win 52-48. It still would be Britain's still divided.
Oh, Britain is probably more divided than it's ever been, and it's frankly heartbreaking to see the crisis that the country is in. And I think that there will be a lot more coming, also with economic impact, once Brexit actually materializes. And it's in our interest, I think, in our mutual interest, to make sure that it goes in as smooth as possible way, in a predictable way, and in a way that doesn't gamble with the Good Friday Agreement, that actually creates clarity for citizens and for businesses alike. I mean, Brexit, if it happens, there's still an interest, which I think is mutual, that it doesn't happen as some kind of cliff edge downfall, some kind of meltdown that we've seen, but that we actually are adults in dealing with each other and sorting this out. And it's a process that turns out to be extremely difficult on the British side, and it looks like they've got the process upside down. I mean, Theresa May is apparently now talking to opposition parties. I mean, you'd imagine there would have been a good moment to do that over the past 2.5 years to see where parliamentary majorities for different scenarios might lie. And now, at the 11th hour, there's very little time, there's a lot of stress, and there's a lot at stake. So let's see. I hope we can all see a good end to this. But I think anyone who speaks about this frivolously is sort of ignoring the significance of this moment.
And we've been trapped in this Article 50 process, which has set this timing going. We should have looked at other ways rather than using the EU's mechanism, which meant we'd end up with this problem. We all predicted it.
Many people pointed that out, that Article 50 was there to make things difficult, but there we go. The UK did start that process, nearly 2 years ago. On this question, we're asking you what Donald Trump Jr. said. Is democracy all but dead in the UK? We've been asking you online in a poll. There is still time to vote in that poll, but at the moment, 43% of you say democracy is dead, but 57% say no. Daniel tweeting in, who's also accusing us of fake news and propaganda, but is saying democracy is totally dead in the UK. He says the people voted for Brexit, and he says the central banks are putting all stop to it. But a sense, I think, of frustration amongst some British people that they think the process is not happening. We are going to take more of your calls on this issue, this very live, changing issue of Brexit after the break. So join us in a couple of minutes. Welcome back to Raw Politics. Your call on the eve of another EU summit that is likely to be dominated by Brexit and whether there should be an extension or not. Will the EU give in to Theresa May's request for an extension up until the end of June? Of course, the UK was due to leave the European Union at midnight next Friday night. That is at the moment looking incredibly unlikely. Lots of people getting in touch. Gary Vernon Wilson saying, rubbish, we went out now, we're fed up with the delay. Gav Jones also tweeting in saying, we need to leave the undemocratic EU now. We should be spending our contributions on our defence needs, pull out of NATO as well, and leave them to deal with Putin. So lots of quite vociferous views on this, and this all comes from the question we're asking, is democracy in the UK dead? It's the claim of Donald Trump Jr., who says the will of the people is being ignored.
There you go. That's another debate on whether the UK should pull out of NATO. I certainly don't think the UK government would like to do so. But anyway, we'll continue with our Brexit chat and talk to Steve from Greece. So thanks very much for your call first. And what do you think? Is democracy in the United Kingdom dead, do you think, Steve?
Yes, good evening from Rhodes in Greece.
Good evening.
Well, to be honest, if it's done correctly, I don't think it is. For example, can I just say 2.5 years ago, obviously I couldn't vote because I'm actually living in Greece for 13 years. 2.5 years ago, people voted on a Brexit that nobody knew what it was all about. Most of the people thought it was about immigration, etc., etc. Yeah. But there's another aspect of it, of a 48 to 52 majority. Now, I've thought about this, and to be honest, talking to a lot of people, a lot of the older people voted to come out, whilst a lot of the younger people wanted to stay in and have freedom of Europe and educate and travel. But unfortunately, over the years, of the 2.5 years, a lot of the, well, a few of the older people have actually passed away, sadly. Whilst when 2.5 years ago, some of the younger people, 13.5, 14, they are now coming back into the voting age. So I do believe there would be a swing there to start with, of obviously maybe 2 or 3%. Now, if Mrs May gets an extension, all she has to do is to get an extension and have another referendum. But before she does that, looking at the manifesto, the large book in Europe, the large, thick manifesto, the government, I think, should publicise, bullet shot, all the things that's actually in there so people know what's in there. It's like a large Bible. and not many people read the Bible.
But
So
Steve,
everything.
isn't the problem, Steve, if you have a second referendum and let's say the majority of people vote Remain, well then it's a score draw.
Remain.
It's a score draw. You go for.
It isn't. No. People was voting 2.5 years ago, and they had no idea what they was voting. My father, who was now 89, who was 86 and a half then, he had no idea. So I said to my father, please don't vote.
But in any future, in any future Brexit deal, if there was another referendum now, we don't really know what the UK's future trade relationship with the EU is going to look like. In fact, Jeremy Corbyn is suggesting the deal that's on the table is currently a blind Brexit. So even 2.5 years on, yes, we know a lot more. I don't think anyone could deny that. But the fact that people would know what they're voting on, that's also not terribly clear.
Well, there's a lot more clarity now.
Everything was running correct in Europe until 2.5 years ago, I think.
Steve, stay with us there on the line. We're just going to bring in Marietje Schaak, our Dutch MEP, to get her take on what Steve has been saying.
Well, I think it's true that a lot has evolved. It's definitely true that young people voted for Remain in more significant young numbers, and I think that they've really been, dealt a terrible hand here by the Brexiteers and others, the Conservative Party, of course. So I feel for them. I think it is awful, and I also don't think you can look at elections like, a score that sort of creates a draw of sorts. I mean, there's always an evolving process of democracy and of reflections of the will of the people in the parliament, and perhaps in a referendum it's up to the British government and the British people and the British parliament to work that out. But the whole idea that one vote with such a slim majority on such a massive decision is, on the one hand, the biggest exercise in democracy, as the Brexiteers say, while on the other hand they're claiming that democracy is near dead in the UK and that this is the end of it. Sorry, it doesn't add up for me.
You can't understand, because the UK Parliament at the moment, many would accuse MPs of trying to stifle Brexit, yet they stood on an election campaign in 2017, a year after Brexit, promising to fulfil
and respect the
votes.
Which is proving to be mission impossible. But we talked a lot about young people there, and there will be a lot of young people coming to Brussels tomorrow, young people from all over Europe, including the United Kingdom, with the slogan, "Make love, not Brexit." And they'll be kissing each other, people from all various different nationalities, to prove
that's much more attractive than everything we see in London.
What would be your message to them, Jonathan, if you happen to bump into them outside the European Council? What would you tell them?
I'd explain what goes on here at the EU, the way they've taken over the lawmaking of Britain.
Well, you make the laws. I mean, your head of government comes to Brussels, your ministers come to Brussels.
One of the things Tony Benn said, not my political cup of tea, he's a
let's just tell the truth here. The member states have much more power.
Let me explain. One of the things Tony Benn said, that proof of a democracy is if you can vote out those who make your rules. And it was quite clear in the United Kingdom we couldn't get rid of those people who were making the laws.
I mean, you know the EU well. Who makes the rules around here? It's clearly the member states. It's the UK, it's Dublin, it's Berlin, it's France, it's Paris, it's all the member states. I mean, there's very little power here in Brussels, really.
It's very clear that member states' governments, including the British government, have a very strong say. They have veto rights on a number of issues. I think that that's hampering the progress of the European Union too much. I think we need to talk about it, because we shouldn't be too distracted with everything that's going on in the European Union. We have the rise of China. We have a confrontational relation with the United States. Brexit has already been an extraordinary distraction, and I hope we're not in the sort of silence before the storm phase, where it could get a lot worse still if we have a hard Brexit and every bet is off in terms of what that would lead to. But we have to also be able to get things done, to work together on defense, as you mentioned, to work together on trade, as you mentioned, and it has to be done in an agile way. And I think that the vetoes that the member state governments still have, on the one hand, gives them a lot of power, on the other hand, doesn't help the EU moving forward. So yes, indeed, they have a lot of say in what happens.
And many people would agree with what May's had to say, but the whole point is the British feel that they don't want their decisions to be made in Paris and Rome and Berlin.
No.
They want the Paris to be made
I wish some decisions would be made in London. Yeah, that would be great.
Very good. Let's go to Andrew, who is in North Yorkshire, listening in tonight. Andrew, is democracy in the UK dead?
It is dead, absolutely dead, yep.
Why do you think that?
Well, I mean, we're just being, they're just blasting this, we've got like propaganda channels such as the BBC, blasting us from the minute we get up until the minute we go to bed on Brexit, trying to drive us mad about Brexit, trying to change a 3-year-old vote. This was 3 years ago. This vote was taken. There was no deal voted for. There shouldn't be a deal. It should be a straight Brexit. And
what is straight Brexit?
Andrew, I assume you voted for Brexit. You voted to take back control to Westminster. Westminster is now in charge. You can't say democracy is dead.
We're not out of the EU yet.
No, but they are still in charge of this process. They could choose to leave with no deal. Parliament hasn't chosen that course. But you can accuse democracy of being dead or the will of the people being frustrated because Brexit was all about Westminster being in control. It might not be able to make a decision, but it is in control.
I think it's out of control, but it's definitely the people's
They're not
representatives
listening to what we
there.
want. They're not doing what we want. There's a bunch of elites in Parliament coming down on us, coming down on free speech. You know, I'm a big Tommy Robinson fan. You know, he's been arrested left, right, and centre. You put something of his on Facebook, Tommy Robinson. I put yesterday Tommy Robinson running for Parliament on Facebook. I immediately got a 30-day ban within 30 minutes.
Okay, so you're happy? No, I know. And a lot
the whole
of
thing, Facebook, the BBC, and the elite. Elitist.
Well, on Euronews, it can all be said out loud. Long live the freedom of expression.
They're not interested in the democracy of the people.
Andrew, thank you very much indeed. And I must say, a digital ninja, who, it must be said, their picture on Twitter is the back of a female's head. Interesting that 1 out of 4 people around the debate table are in favour of Brexit. How is that fair and unbiased, a balanced view? If that is your view, instead of hiding behind a non-picture on Twitter, why don't you call us in? 00800...
Skype us in. You can also Skype. We want to see your face.
333 702, and we're perfectly willing to air your views. The problem is, though, there is an awful lot of people who actually are, like Andrew and others, it must be said, in fact, an awful lot of people who are very frustrated and who do feel, rightly or wrongly, but they do feel that they voted.
They were lied to.
But they feel they voted for the first time, potentially for the first time in that referendum ever, the first time they engaged with the democratic process, and they feel that their view is being held back by, as Donald Trump Jr. said, elites, whether they be in Brussels or London.
So I think the one thing people share across different parties and even across the channel is frustration. It's a frustrating process to witness. For us, it's a matter of witnessing because indeed Westminster is in charge. And there was, of course, the referendum, but there's also a parliament that in a democracy still plays an important role. And what you see is that some people may say that they're not heard, but the people don't agree. And that is a very normal state of being in democracy. It's not like majority rules and everybody else just gets to swallow whatever the majority says. And I think that the challenge is now to work it out between very different opinions in a democracy. And of course, that's going to lead to frustration and even heartbreak on the part of others. But I think the process isn't finished. In fact, it's maybe even coming to a sort of peak only now. And it is too early to say what's going to happen with the result of the referendum. It's too early to say what the parliament is going to decide. Nobody, not even Donald Trump Jr., can predict the future.
But you forget there was a general election 2 years ago where both the major parties were elected on manifestos of respecting the result.
Yeah.
And Article 50 was promised that we'd leave on March the 29th, a week on Friday. That's when we should leave. That's what was in the manifesto. And that's what Theresa May promised 100 times in the House of Commons, that we would leave on March the 29th. That's what we should do.
But as some people have been saying, you know, people are allowed to change their minds, and lots of people are getting in touch with us. John Dale saying democracy in the UK is not dead. Education is. Someone called Will says democracy is not dead. It's just in ICU, which is at least quite funny. And Des Lloyd saying the best thing is to stay in the EU as we have a brilliant deal. Clearly, it is provoking an awful lot of reaction. We want your views on that. Also, your views on Viktor Orban v Brussels. Whose side are you on? Right, were the EPP right to suspend him tonight? And also, do you want to see free trade with the US? You know what to do. Pick up the phone, get on Twitter or indeed on Skype and get in touch. Join us again in a couple of minutes.
Yeah, our lines will be open for just about 15 more minutes, so get in touch. We want to hear from you.
Welcome back to Raw Politics. Interestingly, in the last hour or so, of course, the European Parliament, the biggest party here, the EPP, has decided to suspend Viktor Orban's party from its grouping. The great thing about sitting here is, because we're right in the centre of the European Parliament, we have seen Joseph Daul, who's the president of the EPP, go down the escalators over there, and Manfred Weber, who is the head of the EPP in the European Parliament, walk by. They may sometime come on and sit down and join us. Otherwise, though, what you are talking about, and very keen to talk about tonight, is Brexit and this idea about democracy in the UK potentially being dead if the referendum result was changed, or indeed even if there was a second referendum, and more people calling in.
Yeah, Brexit is just a huge conversation starter. Everyone has something to say about it, and thank you so much for all your comments so far and your calls. And let's go now to Gary from Berkshire, who's on the line. Gary, thank you so much for calling us tonight. It's great to have you with us on the show. Do you think democracy is dead in the UK? Gary, can you hear us?
No, we can't seem to hear him, but Jonathan Phillips has tweeted in saying the UK government does not represent the British people, it represents the EU. And
Hello.
There he is. Hello, Gary.
Hello, Gary.
Hello, sorry about that.
No,
democracy is alive and kicking.
Democracy
It really is, but the problem is lots of us don't like what the democratic message is. And I've listened to Jonathan through the programme. His party has gained immeasurably by a democratic decision of the UK in the 1970s. They have benefited by being able to put councillors into council positions, albeit they've almost been wiped out. They've been able to put MEPs in the European Parliament, albeit they've almost been wiped out. So they have benefited immeasurably. So to say democracy is dead is completely incorrect, in my opinion.
Okay. You've benefited from this, Jonathan.
Well, we put people in to stand for election and get elected, and just like democracy with the referendum, and we campaigned. There was a healthy debate in the British Parliament, in Britain, at the time of the referendum. No one's actually mentioned that. There were big interviews, there was a big discussion, and in the end, the people decided to leave, and that needs to be implemented. Now, if once we leave, and I think we'll be a brilliant future outside the EU, but if 5-10 years down the line, people don't like it, they're welcome to have another vote whether to go back in or not. That's democracy.
Let's hear what Susan from Hertfordshire has to say. I believe she's on the line. Susan, thank you so much for calling Raw Politics your call. We want to ask you, is democracy in the UK dead, do you think?
Democracy is alive in the UK, and it will come even more alive in the next general election when people are given the opportunity to vote for politicians that actually do represent them.
And what kind of politicians do you have in mind? Is there anyone that you'd like to see?
I have politicians that stand on, I believe that I would like to vote for a politician that stands on a manifesto that actually believes in its manifesto and follows through with the promises of its manifesto.
Do you think there will be an election? Do you think a general election is the way out of this kind of...
Well, there obviously will be a general election, whether it's within the next year or the next 4 years. But that is when people will use their voice to demand that democracy represents them. The other point I wanted to raise is the lady presenting the programme. She suggested that the member states have power, but the lady from the European Union went on to suggest that the veto was going to be less powerful and used less in the future with the EU. And this is Guy Verhofstadt's view also. So are we going, if we overturn this result and we choose to remain within the EU will not be the place that we voted to leave. It is moving forward towards a more United States of Europe. And if countries believe that they have a voice, then are told that actually the veto is less valuable, then I think we need that is not a position that the UK wants to be in. It will not be a position that the UK will be able to uphold.
It's an interesting point, Susan. Thank you very much for that. That's great. And that is an interesting point, and it is true that, you know, Europe is moving, and it's moving in a direction.
And let's face it, Guy Verhofstadt, the head of your party, he's a massive, massive federalist, so he scares a lot of people off.
Yeah, sure. I mean,
not everyone wants to go that way.
And it only underlines that there are so many different voices and different representatives here in the Parliament, right?
Yeah.
And UKIP would not have been represented in the large numbers that they were if they weren't here on the European level, using European taxpayers' money to fund the referendum campaign, etc. And of course, there's massive disagreement. And I think that that's normal because people in societies, whether it's the UK or the Netherlands, where I'm from, they don't disagree. They don't agree with each other on everything. Some people...
Isn't the problem the distance of that detachment? As in, like, Brussels to a lot of people in many European countries feels and seems like a remote, faraway place.
Yeah, but I'm a human being. I'm a politician. It's also not a matter of Orban versus Brussels. Brussels is a place where people come together, just like London is a place where people come together. And then they go home to work with their constituents, talk to their constituents. So they take what their constituents need to see. Changes in agricultural policy, changes in digital policy, changes in defense or foreign policy or trade policy, and they work it out together, and then they go home to talk to their constituents. Brussels is an abstract thing to me. The EU is an abstract thing to me. But what I think people see very well is a person like yourself, a person like me. We disagree, but we each represent people, and that's the beauty of democracy, which is indeed alive and in the UK kicking.
Well, there we go.
Multilingual talking shop.
We are going to carry on this discussion. You've only got a couple of more minutes to call in. You're clearly quite keen on all of this. Pick up the phone 00800 333 3702, and we'll carry on talking about this and potentially even something else in a couple of minutes.
Yeah, I'm dying to talk about Viktor Orban, so please, if you have any thoughts on that, the fact that he's been suspended from the European People's Party, it's pretty massive. Get in touch. See you after the break.
Welcome back to Raw Politics Eurocall, a programme a bit like European politics at the moment, almost entirely dominated by Brexit, but I say almost.
Yes, because I believe we have someone on the line now to talk about Viktor Orban and the fact that his political party, that's Fidesz, currently governing in Hungary, has been suspended from the European People's Party. That's the centre-right party. It's the biggest political group here in the European Parliament. And we have Angel on the line from London who'd like to talk about that. So which side are you on, Angel? Are you on the side of Brussels? Or are you on the side of Viktor Orban?
Good evening. Yes. Well, first of all, I like Brussels and the EU. And for that, two things what I would like to highlight. One of them is democracy is not that in the UK, definitely true. And if they give back the vote to the people, the final vote, because the vote for the Brexit has happened since 3 years ago, which is a long
Angel,
time.
what do you think about Viktor Orban, though? What do you think about Viktor Orban? We haven't got much time.
Viktor Orban, yes. About Viktor Orban, I would like to say that I'm Hungarian and I'm in the United Kingdom because of him.
Oh, wow. So you fled your country because of Viktor Orban? There you go.
I left the country when he started.
Interesting, and you're not the only. A lot of the young have fled Hungary for various reasons.
Therefore, I think it's really important. This is not about Brussels versus Orban.
Yes.
The decision taken tonight is from his political family to say you've crossed the line, okay? But on the other hand, this is, I believe, about the rule of law that Viktor Orban has violated. And it's a good thing that there are consequences. We need to see the details of what those consequences are. But it's taken way too long for the Conservative group to attach any consequences, to draw conclusions from what Viktor Orban has been doing to the rule of law, to the media and to his country that makes people flee. That's serious.
And even us framing it as Brussels is not very clear. But anyway, we're running out of time.
Just a few more tweets on Brexit. Gary Clark, let's be honest, we all like democracy if we support the message. Politics in London needs to be reformed with the removal of winner takes all. We need to work together to solve a national, I think it means a national solution, not pull apart. And Matteo saying democracy is well and live in the UK. Even another referendum is held. People or elected representatives contribute to democracy, even when both make mistakes. Let's get tonight's last words. Away from Brexit, this comes from George Parker. He's the political editor of the Financial Times in London. He says, so if Tory Eurosceptics vote down May's deal again next week, they will hand over to 27 European leaders a decision on whether or not to let Britain's economy and businesses drop off a Brexit cliff on March 29th. He goes on to say that is a novel way of taking back control.
There you go. Well, thank you so much for tuning in tonight, and thank you so much for both our members of the European Parliament for being with us here tonight and taking all your calls and your comments. We'll be back tomorrow right here from Brussels once again from the European Parliament.
One with
and
the
Raw Politics,
council meeting.
your call.
Thanks for watching. Good night.